Hi, I'm Jonathan, editor-in-chief of the Sino-Southeast Initiative. I'm glad to be joined by Andy, our lead for science and tech coverage. We're honored to be joined by Ray Wang, a Washington-based analyst focused on US-China economic and tech statecraft, particularly with regards to semiconductors and artificial intelligence. Ray's pieces have appeared in Foreign Policy, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the Diplomat, and other leading publications, and he has been widely quoted in publications like the South China Morning Post, Nikkei Asia, and Al Jazeera. It's a privilege to have you here with us today, Ray.
Yeah, thanks for the kind introduction and really appreciate you guys having me here. And congrats for the launch for the Sino-Southeast Asia Institute. I really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Ray. So today we primarily want to talk to you about a topic receiving much attention in recent weeks, that is semiconductors and artificial intelligence, especially against this backdrop of US protectionism and the wider US-China rivalry. I want to start this conversation with a discussion of the kind of elephant in the room, the tariff war between US and China. Specifically, I want to talk about its implications in regards to semiconductors and AI, because part of the US strategy here seems to be an attempt to get companies like TSMC to increase chip manufacturing and jobs locally in the US, which the US has arguably neglected over the years. I'm wondering what other considerations are there here regarding Trump's chip strategy, and how realistic is it that Trump's tariff strategy will succeed in achieving its aims?
Yeah, I think first it's very important to kind of clarify what's U.S. semiconductor strategy. Uh, Previously under the Biden administration and right now under the Trump administration, I think it's clear for me that the Trump administration is pushed forward for a more comprehensive semiconductor supply chain regarding advanced manufacturing. So that will include you have most of the U.S. design firm for AI chips or other smartphone chips located in the United States, but you also want manufacturing presence that combine with Intel, Samsung, and TSMC in the next few years. And surely you also want to have the packaging presence in the United States. Because what's happening under the Biden administration is that, okay, so we want to bring more foreign chip makers to manufacturing advanced chips in the United States. But those manufacturing chips essentially need to send back to Taiwan or Korea for final packaging assembly for the final products, right? So if your goal is to kind of de-risk either from Taiwan or from China, you want to have a more comprehensive supply chain located in the United States. So that's, I think, what Biden administration later on trying to do and what Trump administration currently is pushing, right? So I think one of the great example for this is TSMC's additional 100 billion investment that announced last month, right? They announced additional three fabs, two additional advanced packaging plants, and also one R&D center, right? So what they are trying to do is kind of building out a more comprehensive supply chain to really enhance U.S. economic and national security. This is very clear. I think it's one of the key pillars of U.S. semiconductor strategy under the Trump administration. And I believe this policy will continue in the next few years. So that's number one, right? So I think what you want to ask is kind of implications of the tariff that imposed by the Trump administration over the past 2 months, right? Apparently, I think the first indication or first implication is that will increase the cost of building up the supply chain in the United States. Because take semiconductor manufacturing, for example, right? You need to import equipment, you need to import tools, materials that go into the fabs, right? And most of the fabs that under the CHIPS Act during the Biden administration and the recent announced fabs for TSMC, they are still mostly still under construction or haven't even started constructed, right? So if your tariff right now being imposed or future tariff being imposed, you're gonna increase the cost of building the supply chain here in the United States. And that will kind of undermine and contrast with your previous policy goal when it comes to like building up the semiconductor supply chain here in the United States. And it's not only hurting uh, foreign chip makers like Samsung, SK Hynix, and TSMC. It will also undermine firms like Micron, Intel. Micron apparently is different cases because most of their manufacturing presence for memory is located in Japan, Singapore, and Taiwan. But surely for Intel, there will be a major blowout considering they are building fabs in Ohio and some of the existing presents that require additional equipment moving forward.
Great. Then I want to turn to a related discussion then on export controls. It seems that, there's been a large conversation on how, you have this US export control driven containment strategy that's known as this kind of AI diffusion rule, which is really about controlling the exports of advanced AI chips and models to make sure they end up in the hands of US and its allies and not in competing adversary countries like China. First, could you kind of give us a sense of how effective they are? And second, I'm curious here as to what you think the wider implications might be. You noted in a piece in Foreign Policy that US export controls might catalyze domestic Chinese investments. At the same time, there's this worry that when the US tries to restrict global access to chips, some of its other countries might end up turning to China instead. So kind of talk us through what the considerations here you think are important.
Yeah, I think, besides export control, I think it's also important to include some other measures, including like entity list, Section 301 tariffs investigation under the first Trump administration, and also start recently in the Trump 2.0, right? I think all these things should count as a restrictions, including export controls. So in terms of like how effective it is, so we see under the Biden administration, the first major export control come out in October 2022 that's specifically targeting semiconductor manufacturing the under 14 nanometers, also memory under about 16 nanometers, and I think 18 to 16 nanometers below for memory. And you also having a sort of a threshold for AI chips that mostly focus on interconnected bandwidth. So this is a couple of things, right? And you have another one that coming out from October 2023 that mostly focus on AI chips, which we typically call GPU or ASICs. And the key suppliers in this area is NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, and for the ASICs you have Google, other players like Broadcom, AWS, uh, those companies, right? And one of the most, well, I'll say two of the most recent regulations. First, it's the December 2024 regulations that targeting high bandwidth memory, which is the types of DRAM that goes to AI chips that used to train AI models. And you also have a restriction in the same month. Well, it's within the same rule that targeting semiconductor manufacturing equipment, then targeted to restrict Chinese access to advanced semiconductor manufacturing equipment. And the latest one will be the one announced in January 15, the AI diffusion rule, which kind of the key goal is having different tier of countries globally to limit, particularly in tier 2 and tier 3, in terms of their total computing power that powered by AI chips. So this is kind of give you the brief overview on the current regulatory landscape. So in terms of like how effective it is, I think for now it's unclear how effective this in terms of like China's AI developments. Because first, export control usually have the delay effect, right? So the 2022 export control come out, it takes time to enforce. It also takes time for all their stocks of AI chips running out in the next few years. Because to my understanding, for the AI chips cluster, it typically can run 4 to 5 years, right? And we haven't even counted for those chips that being smuggled or those chips that being stockpiled before the restrictions, right? So this logic or rationale can applies to 2022 October control, also 2023 October control on AI chips, right? So if you see most of the Chinese AI models, it's trained by mostly trained by NVIDIA's chips, that including H100, H200, H800, and the H20 that launched in 2024. That specifically seeking to comply the previous export controls, right? So I think for now it's for now really hard to say like how effective it is, right? I will say the more effective part will be restricting China's access to semiconductor manufacturing equipment, particularly the lithography tool from ASML. That is way back to 2019, and you also have an additional rule that imposed in previous years. I think that one definitely restrict China's ability in advanced manufacturing. If you see their leading foundry like SMIC, SMIC, they still struggling to um, go to process now that under 7 nanometers, and it also limits their scale of production in 7 nanometers currently. So I think in that way it's effective, but in terms of like how the AI chips control on China's AI models development, I think for now it's still unclear because what we are seeing over the past couple months is that the fast narrowing gap between Chinese and US AI models. I will say right now the gap will be within a couple months or even with just a month. So I think it's unclear how effective it is. And I will say like surely it's a pain point for Chinese AI industry moving forward because when you have more and more chips being controlled and your existing chips is gradually depreciated, that will certainly kind of limits your ability to train your AI models. But this is under the condition that how fast Chinese domestic GPU can catch up to some of their existing chip, right? It is, for example, if their existing GPUs from NVIDIA is depreciated, let's say in 2027, 2028, and you kind of can expect Huawei to have better chips until then to kind of supply to Chinese cloud service providers and AI companies that train their AI models. Yeah.
Right. Right. Before I pass it on to Andy, then I want to focus on a kind of broader question on what we can see moving forward, which is that we see stronger public-private partnerships in domains like semiconductors and AI, precisely because these technologies are so important for national security and the wider geopolitical race between the US and China. So, you mentioned DeepSeek. We saw that right after its success, the founder met with Chinese Premier Li Qiang. Or after the week after the R1's release, the Bank of China announced the AI Industry Development Action Plan to provide 1 trillion yuan over 5 years to support Chinese AI infrastructure. Will we see a kind of Chinese industrial policy that's increasingly focused on forefront technologies? And what do you think the implications of such developments are? Are we going to kind of see this race to the bottom where you have US and China just aggressively subsidizing local domestic tech industries so they can beat each other out?
Yeah, this is very good questions. I think when it comes to industrial policy in China, I will actually argue that DeepSeek is not really a product of Chinese industrial policy. Because if you look at their founding sources, it's mostly from the High Flyer, which is a hedge fund um, that has been one of the top hedge fund in China, right? So if you look at allocating foundings for DeepSeek, it's actually not that much money compared to the AI companies in the United States, right? But I do see a trend that both countries, or this is already a trend that both countries see artificial intelligence as top priority in terms of country's strategy, country's industrial policy. I will easily just characterize as both countries kind of will be subsidized over this industry. What I will say is both country will be strongly invest in artificial intelligence in their own countries, right? We see this just recently under the Trump administration, the Stargate project that proposed 500, I think it's 400 to 500 billion to invest AI infrastructure, energy, and R&D. Right, in China, beside the initiative you mentioned, what happened in China is that there's also local initiative they launched to support artificial intelligence industry. So, so why I would put it this way, it's like both country, both on the federal level or central level and local level, there's a clear recognition that we must invest in this frontier technology to enhance its economic competitiveness, enhance its national security, essentially to race for the global leadership in artificial intelligence.
Great. Okay, I'll pass it on to Andy then.
Thank you so much, Ray, for answering those questions. I have a few questions for you as well. The first one is it is very well known about the semiconductor industry that it is very reliant on open trade between countries due to the specialization required at each step of the supply chain. And semiconductors are largely imported to the United States. For instance, as you mentioned, ASML makes the lithography machines that are vital for printing these chips. Whereas the manufacturings are mostly done in Taiwan through TSMC. And then the designs are sort of conducted by firms like Intel, AMD, and NVIDIA in the United States. With the end product, being things like iPhones or computers and laptops being shipped around the world. So given this context, what do you think are the consequences of the current administration's approach, not only tariffs, but the proposed Section 232 investigation into the semiconductor industry, which will determine whether the import of semiconductor constitutes a national security concern on, number one, the industry, how would that affect the industry as a whole? And number two, on global trade and the future of semiconductor. Yeah.
Yeah, this is very good questions. I think we previously touched upon a little bit. Um, I think so. First, I think it's important to kind of understand like the strategy or the tariff strategy under the Trump administrations. I see this is like a dual track strategy, right? So on one hand, I believe the administration want to impose sort of like reciprocal or baseline tariff that probably will rise about 10% to every single country globally. The previous proposal in April 2nd will be like 30-40%, but I believe there will be the ceiling and it's negotiable. And I do believe they will be lower, but we kind of can expect maybe globally will at least have the 10%, probably because US want to address its debt problem, increase the government's revenue, kind of address also address the trade deficit. That's there's pillar number one, right? I think the pillar number two will be tools like 232 investigation, 301 investigation under Department of Commerce in the name of national security to potentially to impose tariff on specific products, right? Just last week or 2 weeks ago, Department of Commerce launched investigation on pharmaceutical, semiconductor, copper, and other critical goods for the United States. So I will see a scenario that in the next few months, the administration will potentially impose tariff on semiconductor related goods, but I don't know how wide the scope will be. Because if you read a statement from the BIS, the Bureau of Industry and Security under the Department of Commerce, the statement is actually saying not just raw semiconductor, it's semiconductor derivative, which will be including consumer devices, consumer electronics. If the scenario that will be imposed tariff on not just semiconductor, but also servers, consumer electronics, smart device, stuff like that, I will believe the impact will be significant and consequential for not just US industry, but global industry, not just in semiconductor, but also in AI server, in computer, in smartphone. You can see dramatic impact, particularly most of these products, their major customer is located in United States. So that's number one. So that's on the kind of customer side in US. And you will also see the dramatic impact on suppliers, manufacturer across the whole AI semi-hardware supply chain, right? If we impose tariff on this country, let's say Taiwan, South Korea, Vietnam, Malaysia, right? Many of the OEMs or ODMs that, which is the suppliers that finalize or make the goods essentially, you will increase significant cost for not just the customer and potentially pass down the whole supply chain. So I can definitely see that scenario, but I'm really not sure how far the administration want to go in terms of the scope of the investigation. But I will certainly see a scenario is like there will be some tariff that be imposed on these products. And I think the administration has been very clear on their intention to start the 232 investigation on semiconductor. And I think the administration has tried to facilitate the process, right? They only give 21 days of public comment period. And I believe the public comment period will end in May 7. And I think if the Trump administration want to push this really forward, like really much faster, I can see a scenario that like come out the results of investigation in late May or early June, which they actually have time to up to 270 days. But I do believe that Trump administration definitely want to fast forward this, and there's no way they will wait until 270 days pass to impose this tariff, given the efficiency they want to address, the the key issues they want to address, because big part of the trade deficit of the United States is actually because they import so much consumer electronics, semiconductor related goods. Yeah.
Got it. So there's going to be a lot more headwinds for the industry and as for global trades as a whole than
Yeah.
tailwinds going forward, which is understandable given the current administration's policy. Following up on that question, in the past week, we saw earnings from, my apologies, from companies like ASML and TSMC. In ASML's earning call, for instance, the CEO, Christophe Fourquat, stated that the demand outlook remains strong, primarily driven by AI capex investment. Similarly, for TSMC, it maintained its annual revenue forecast after beating its quarterly revenue expectations, stating that again, driven by strong AI demands. So how do you sort of interpret these earnings results from these two industry powerhouses? They're basically monopolies at this point. Should we view these news more positively as an indication of a strong semiconductor supply chain, or should we, approach these results with a more caution?
Yeah, and sort of to give some readers some background, right? ASML basically control most of the lithography tools market, and TSMC basically dominates the advanced node manufacturing in semiconductor. So for both company, they are sort of like the vibe check or sentiment check for semiconductor investment or AI hardware investment. So apparently, I've been watched both of their earnings quite closely, and we have more earnings coming up in the next 2 weeks. I think first, I think maybe let's start with SML. I think their revenue is actually beating the expectation, but their guidelines actually sort of like lower expectation from the market, especially for their quarter two or full year guiding outlook. So I think that's what concerning people, because what investors worry at this point is like, hey, will this um, the AI investment trend gone, or is it going to continue, right? You can kind of see first from how ASML sell their lithography tools to those sort of like in the mainstream manufacturer like TSMC, Intel, and Samsung. I think that's number one. I think despite the CEO has been quite optimistic about the future growth, I do see a more conservative outlook by the company. Especially compared to last year, if you compare their revenue performance, net income this year, it's actually not that strong. And I think their CEO or the earnings, I think was in fourth quarter or third quarter, I think they kind of implied this. Their outlook for 2025 released last year is actually reduced for like 40% or something, right? So they kind of imply that. But I think this is just can be the one indicator for future AI hardware investment in the next few quarters. And I think another key point to mention is that the CEO also kind of highlighted the impacts of the tariff and a lot of trade uncertainty for the company. Because basically, big part of the lithography tool is either export to China or export to the United States. Both countries right now is impose tariff to each other, although like China didn't impose tariff on other countries, right? Or countries like Netherlands, but they do impose some tariff um, for countries like Netherlands, right? So you kind of can see if the cost increase for the customer, that could potentially impact the sales of ASML's product. Can or potentially kind of cause more uncertainty when it comes to the negotiation of the price between ASML and semiconductor manufacturing firms. And I think to move forward for TSMC, I think TSMC is a very interesting case because their net income is actually beat the expectation. Oh, no, sorry, actually a little bit lower than the expectation. But I think it's sure if you look at their year-to-year performance this quarter, it's actually I think it was like 40% up compared to last year. So it's to show like the company's performance is still very strong. I think again, people worry about the future growth. My personal interpretation is that I think 2025 still will be a very good year for TSMC. Probably you can see from the TSMC's CoWoS orders. Right now, I think this year is still in a situation that TSMC couldn't fulfill all the demand. They have to outsource it to companies like ASE Technology or Amkor to kind of helping them to digest those crazy what CEO CC Wei last year said, the incredible or crazy demand or insane demand. I think this year is still the same. You still see a lot of AI chips orders. So to kind of quickly expand CoWoS is basically a downstream packaging technology for AI chips. They put the substrates, the GPUs, the logic die, and also the HBM die together as a broader GPU product. So if you see that, I believe the AI growth in 2025 will still be very strong. But it's essentially comes down to, I think, investors' expectation, right? I think right now the expectation was so high, like it's hard to kind of measure how what kinds of performance the company need to give to fulfill investors' sentiment. So I think that's the things I will say for now. I do believe that companies still have strong performance in 2025. I will suggest that I think the growth of the CoWoS order will be a little slower compared to 2024 and 2025. And I think that's the things we need to closely tracking. We also need to track how the guidelines for TSMC's outlook for CoWoS for their high performance computing's revenue will unfold in second quarter or third quarter moving forward. Yeah.
That's perfect. Yeah, it just seems like the expectations and concerns over uncertainties is definitely being priced in, and even though the growth are phenomenal, there's more concerns, and that's being reflected in the price.
Yeah, if I can add one thing, I think sentiment is very, very important here because I think since this week, people is already getting suspected about the whole AI hardware investment, right? And after Trump administration starting having more major adjustment of the trade policy, that create even more uncertainty for the investors and people being more conservative for putting their money in AI semi supply chain. So I think all this uncertainty, it's hard to see when it ends, but I do see the second half of 2025 could potentially see sort of like a rebound of the sentiment, given the first uncertainty will potentially being addressed till that time because you have 90 days tariff pause recently, and I think so in 90 days will be probably about July, right? So you will probably address some uncertainty, and when the second quarter's earning come out, that will also provide more clarity for investors and the market. Yeah.
For sure, for sure. And just to build on top of that question, regarding uncertainties, I want to get deeper into that. So as we know, the Trump administration is extremely volatile when it comes to its policies. And in the past week, for instance, we learned that Trump announced new restrictions on NVIDIA's export of H20 chips to China. And as you previously mentioned, H20 chips is specifically designed for the Chinese market by NVIDIA. So if you have to give us sort of some guidance moving forward, how do we sort of read the news, both as sort of trying to engage with the policies as well as investors? How do we separate the signals from the noises in trying to understand what the future will hold with regards to the technology innovation as well as the policy during these uncertain times with uncertain policies? Yeah.
Yeah. I think for the market industry, it's very important to understand the rationale of the strategy under the Trump administration. Because I think the ban of the H20 and chips that have equivalent performance in terms of memory bandwidth and computational performance is actually signal a gradual shift of US AI strategy against China. Because under the Biden administration, what they are trying to do is we want to impose export control while at the same time to ensure some business opportunities for US AI chips company like AMD and NVIDIA, right? And that's why, later on, NVIDIA designed the H20 chips that designed for the Chinese market. AMD continued to sell their MI308 GPU to China. And the key goal here for the Biden administration is to ensure the technological edge for US AI companies and or US semiconductor companies, right? I couldn't specifically say how big of the gap or the edge they try to keep, but I will kind of assume probably about like 2-3 years in terms of 2-3 years in terms of hardware. But I think Trump administration showed a clear shift, or it's sort of like a continuation of the we want to use export control, not just keep a certain age. We want to leverage all the leverage we have currently, right? So we want to ban the H20 chips, which have a better memory bandwidth compared to H100, which is the chips that launched by NVIDIA in 2022. The memory bandwidth is extremely pivotal for inference training, which is the key element for reasoning models that like T6R1, T1's 32B ByteDance still about 1.5, right? So for those models, they try to like further limit or even I would say contain China's AI development in the next few years. And one of the key they believe is a loophole. It's H20 and AMI 308 because those chips can still help Chinese AI companies to train their AI models, particularly the reasoning models. And it has much better, well, I won't say much better. It has a better memory bandwidth for previous H100, right? So they believe that, oh, like we need to ban these chips to further restrict China's AI development. Especially, I think there's some data show that a big part of the inference training capacity in China is done by H20. And H20 here is also important to clarify. H20 is equipped with HBM3, which is the fourth generation of HBM. And starting from early this year, NVIDIA also supply H20E that equipped with HBM3E with 8 layers stack of DRAM dies. So because of that, I believe like, oh, we shouldn't supply all these AI chips that are very favorable for China's AI development. So that's the reason they want to ban it. And I think the key implication here has two. So number one, it's clear that I think for NVIDIA and other AI chips company of US will be very, very hard to compete in Chinese market in the next 3 to 4 years or 2 to 3 years, given the fact that number one, you couldn't sell any chips that are more advanced than H20, right? And in China right now, you have very, very competitive chips like Huawei's 910C, which in terms of computational performance, is much better than H20, less backed by data, but despite having little lower memory bandwidth. So I can see a scenario that when Huawei have 920 series coming up, that have better performance in terms of training models than H200, right? And whatever chips that NVIDIA launch after that, which will be less advanced than H20, right? So basically this restriction, I would say basically block most of the data center business of NVIDIA, AMD, Intel, moving forward in Chinese market, and let's account for these companies about for NVIDIA it's like 8% of their revenue in data center. I think it's about I think I forgot a number, but maybe like 15% of AMD, and not really about Intel because Intel don't really sell AI chips to China, right? So I think that's the number one implications, and number two will be I think Chinese company, especially Huawei and Byron and Ether and all this domestic GPU firm, will greatly benefited by all this new export control. Because maybe in the next 1 to 2 years, I can see AI companies still using existing GPUs from NVIDIA, whether it's H12, H20, H100, H200, H800 or chips provided by AMD. But I think 3 to 4 years when these chips get depreciated and Huawei and other firms providing more powerful chips, they will start and use them more and more and moving forward, right? So those companies can generate a lot more revenue from their sales in China and reinvest those revenue in their R&D to provide much better chips in the next 5 years, next 3 years, or next 8 years. Yeah.
Well, I think that was a lot for us to take in. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your time, Ray. It's been a pleasure having you. I think, this has been a conversation on what is a really timely topic, and we look forward to seeing, more of your analysis in the coming weeks as, more earnings come out, whatnot. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you both for your time. I really appreciate it. And those are very sophisticated and well prepared questions. I really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you.